Hey there, before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story. I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let your mind drift. These horror stories will crawl under your skin and linger in the dark. Let's begin. It started with the air, thick, warm, a little off, like something stale left too long in a sealed room. I had been out in the glades before, but this stretch of swamp was different. Not just because it was further south than I'd ever pushed, but because of what brought me there. My cousin Joey had gone missing 3 weeks prior, last seen near the tree line dragging his small airboat trailer behind his pickup. He had always been drawn to the forgotten parts of the state, the places maps only hinted at, but this time he hadn't come back. I wasn't looking for answers exactly, not in a heroic sense. What I wanted was closure. His mom was breaking apart day by day, and I couldn't stomach watching her sit by the window, praying like he might just stroll up the driveway again. So I borrowed a beat-up John boat from a friend, packed a cheap satellite radio, a pistol I barely knew how to use, and enough water and supplies for a 3-day stay. I told no one I was going except my brother. He told me I was crazy and hung up on me. By the time I pushed off into the water, the sun was already behind me. The mangroves formed these black, spindly walls that swallowed the light the deeper I went. I knew better than to move much at night, so I tied up at a half-submerged cypress and waited until morning, dozing in short bursts while the hum of insects pressed in from every direction. At first light, I went further south, deeper. The channels were tight and snaking, and more than once I had to pull the boat along on foot, water up to my thighs and murky as old coffee. I didn't see any signs of Joey, not his boat, not his gear, no tarp camps, no broken branches, not even footprints in the muck. But there were signs of something. I started finding animals in strange positions. A raccoon on its back, with its legs bent wrong, like it had frozen mid-sprint. A gator floating belly up with its jaws still locked tight, no marks on it. Birds perched along the same line of trees, all facing the same way, unmoving even when I passed beneath them. By the second day, my SAT radio was dead. I checked the battery panel and found it full of moisture, even though I had kept it dry. My phone had no service, but that was expected. I told myself I could always retrace my route, but I didn't want to yet. I hadn't come far enough. Late that evening, I found what looked like a dry patch of land. It wasn't much, maybe 20 feet across, ringed by sawgrass and strangler fig. I dragged the boat up as far as I could, threw down a tarp, and tried to eat something. That's when I noticed it. There were carvings in the bark of a tree. Deep, erratic slashes running parallel, almost rhythmic, not made by a blade, but something sharp, maybe claws, maybe human fingernails. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. Then the smell came. Not rot, exactly, but something bitter, like rusted metal left in the sun. I turned slowly and looked into the brush and saw nothing, but I could hear something moving, not rushing, but circling. I got up, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other, and scanned the edges. Leaves shivered and shifted, but nothing came through. I didn't sleep much that night. Every few minutes I thought I heard something else, breathing close to the tarp. A low grunt behind the trees, a splash nearby that didn't sound like an animal. I thought about firing the pistol just to make noise, but I was afraid of what it might attract. When the sun came up again, I knew something wasn't right. The air was too still. No birds called, and even the insects were quiet. My boat was untouched, but when I walked back toward the tree with the claw marks, there was something new carved below the old ones. A single word: stay. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't carved the same way. It looked like it had been scraped in with something dull, messy, almost frantic. I turned and backed away, and for the first time, I knew I had gone too far. That's when I heard the boat's rope snap. Just once, a clean pop, like it had been cut. I spun and saw the bow drifting loose, slipping back into the channel like something had pushed it off. There was no wind, no movement on the water. It was just gone, floating away into the dark tunnel of trees. I ran after it, but my foot caught something buried in the mud. I fell hard, soaking my clothes and smashing my elbow on a buried root. When I sat up, the boat was already out of reach, vanishing down the bend. And then, behind me, from the direction of the clearing, I heard footsteps. Not heavy, not fast, but unmistakably human. Someone or something was walking toward me. I didn't turn around right away. Something about the pace of the footsteps stopped me. They weren't clumsy or hesitant, but slow and deliberate, like whoever it was knew exactly where they were stepping. I crouched low in the mud, trying not to breathe too loud, my pistol shaking in my hand. The footsteps got closer, then paused behind the trees. I could hear the brush settle and shift like something was leaning just past the trunk, watching me. "Joey," I said, barely above a whisper. No answer, just the soft crackle of leaves. Then more footsteps, but this time from a different direction. 2 sets now. They weren't trying to sneak, they were circling. I backed up toward the water's edge and felt my boot sink into a pool of soft muck. I ripped it free and kept moving, eyes darting through the trees. I couldn't see anyone, just shapes between branches. One of them stepped forward for a moment, and I swear, it looked like a man bare-chested, covered in filth, his face hidden behind what looked like a strip of wet cloth. Then he disappeared again. That was enough. I took off through the brush, cutting west toward a patch of open water I had seen earlier. If I could just find high ground, maybe signal a plane, maybe climb a tree and see a way out. Every step forward was a gamble. Hidden roots nearly took me down twice. My arm throbbed from the fall, and the pistol felt heavier with each mile. I didn't know if I was being followed, but the forest no longer felt empty. It felt like it was breathing with me, watching, waiting. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing, a circular stretch of raised land dotted with palmettos and dead branches. I stopped there to rest, crouched low with my back to a wide oak. That's when I noticed what was stuck between the roots, a torn piece of tarp, blue, sun-faded, but still strong. I pulled it out and found the corner of a backpack underneath. It had been buried halfway. Inside was a crumpled shirt, a broken GPS, and a photo, one of Joey and me, taken years ago. My breath caught. I hadn't seen that picture in a decade. He must have kept it with him. I wanted to believe he left it on purpose, but the way it was half buried said otherwise. Something or someone had taken it off him. My gut turned cold. I stood up and started to back away when I noticed the smell again, that same rusted metal stink. I turned and saw someone standing at the tree line, not hiding, just watching, barefoot, tall, shirtless, head tilted slightly, like he was trying to place me. I didn't wait. I took off toward the water, crashing through brush, thorns slicing my arms and legs. Behind me, branches snapped. Someone was following, not running, just walking steadily. I could hear it, each slow, deliberate step. I broke through to the edge of the water and almost fell in. A narrow, flat-bottomed boat was tied to a branch nearby. Not mine. Older, weather-beaten. I didn't care. I grabbed the rope, yanked it free, and shoved off into the water, paddling with my hands until I was too far for anyone to reach. When I finally turned to look, no one was there. The tree line was still, but I knew they were watching. I drifted for hours, not caring where the current took me. I was too tired to think straight. At some point, I passed an old dock, half collapsed, and used a broken board to paddle toward it. I tied off and collapsed onto the planks. In the morning, I followed a dirt path from the dock inland until I found a ranger outpost. I told them I'd gotten turned around. I didn't mention the carvings, or the man watching me, or Joey. A few days later, I drove back to my aunt's house. I gave her the photo. I told her I'd found it near a dry patch of land, but I didn't tell her what else I saw. I still don't know what those people were. Locals, hunters, gone strange, survivors of something deeper out there. I just know this: Joey didn't walk out of there, and he didn't disappear by accident. I still hear it sometimes. That soft crunch of leaves behind me, that bitter smell, that word carved into my memory like it was cut into bark. Stay. I didn't, but someone else might. In the late summer of 2021, Brian Laundrie vanished into the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Florida Everglades. His disappearance followed the tragic death of his future spouse, Gabby Petito, a case that gripped the nation and sparked a massive search effort. But what made Brian's vanishing so haunting wasn't just the headlines. It was the place he disappeared into, an immense, tangled swamp where the land itself seems to swallow people whole. The Everglades stretch for over 1 million acres of marsh, mangroves, and waterways that twist in endless, confusing patterns. It's a landscape that challenges even the most experienced outdoorsman. Thick sawgrass cuts like knives, mud sucks at your boots, and venomous snakes and alligators lurk beneath the surface. Search teams, hundreds of officers, volunteers, and canine units fanned out through the wetlands, battling oppressive heat and near-impossible terrain. Helicopters circled overhead while boats navigated narrow water channels, but the wilderness always seemed to close in. After weeks without sign, a small campsite was discovered near Carlton Reserve, a particularly treacherous section of the Everglades, long known to be dangerous. The ground was muddy and thick with decaying vegetation. Near the site, Brian's remains were found hidden beneath brush and mud, almost swallowed by the swamp itself. The discovery shocked many, but it also confirmed what locals had known for years. The Everglades don't just hide people, they consume them. Alongside Brian's remains, authorities found a notebook filled with haunting, desperate messages. The writings suggested a man caught between fear and survival, trapped not only by the vast wilderness, but by his own thoughts. It was clear he struggled against more than nature. He was haunted by something deeper, a darkness that seemed to press down from the trees and seep from the water. The Everglades are a place of silence and shadow, where time drifts and hope fades. Even with GPS and modern gear, it's easy to become lost. trapped in an endless maze of water and foliage that rearranges itself with every tide and storm. Those who have survived the swamp speak of disorientation, a feeling watched by unseen eyes, and the terrifying weight of isolation that grows heavier by the day. Brian's story is a chilling reminder that technology can fail, maps can mislead, and the wilderness remains an untamable force. The Everglades don't just challenge your body, they threaten your mind. They whisper in the dark, hiding secrets in the murky water and twisted roots, waiting for those foolish enough to enter unprepared. The notebook found near Brian's remains was a grim window into his final days. The entries were scattered and erratic, reflecting a mind fraying under pressure. He wrote about the unbearable heat, the endless swarms of mosquitoes, and the crushing loneliness that seeped into his bones. But there was something else, an undercurrent of fear that didn't come from the natural dangers of the swamp. One passage mentioned voices in the night, whispers carried on the humid air that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. He described shadows moving just beyond sight, shapes twisting between the trees that vanished when he tried to focus on them. Brian wrote that the swamp felt alive, watching him, trapping him in a loop of endless wandering. He said the ground beneath him sometimes felt unstable, like it could give way at any moment, dragging him into the dark water below. Rescue teams later confirmed the terrain around the campsite was particularly unstable. Pockets of deep mud, hidden sinkholes, and flooded depressions that can open suddenly. It's a place where even experienced searchers had to proceed with extreme caution. For Brian, who was isolated, injured, and likely dehydrated, the Everglades became a prison with no walls, where each step forward was a battle against the earth itself. His last entries grew more fragmented, almost like cries for help written in the dark. He spoke of hallucinations, visions of figures standing silently among the cypress trees, eyes glowing faintly in the night. He wondered if he was losing his mind or if something else was there, something ancient and watching. The Everglades have long been a place of mystery and folklore. Locals tell stories of strange lights flickering in the mist, of inexplicable sounds that echo through the swamp at night, and of people who vanish without a trace, their bodies never found. Brian's disappearance fits into this dark tapestry, a true tale of how the wilderness can overwhelm even the most prepared. His remains, discovered months later, brought some closure, but left many questions unanswered. What exactly haunted him in those final days? Was it the harsh elements alone, or something deeper, something the Everglades have hidden for centuries? The park rangers now warn visitors to respect the swamp's power, to stay on marked trails, to never underestimate how quickly the Everglades can become a trap. Brian Laundrie's story is a sobering reminder. In the Everglades, the wilderness is always watching, always waiting, and sometimes it claims those who wander too far. Story 3. There's something different about the stillness out there. Not peaceful, just waiting. That's what I remember most. I was working a contract gig for a small surveying company, mapping wetland boundaries for a private land deal. Most of the time, it was uneventful, boring even. Swamp work is slow, sweaty, and full of bugs. But that week, we had been sent out to ward an area few had touched in years. The old man who hired us said his father once ran cattle through there, but now it was all overgrown. We were supposed to confirm some outdated land markers. The guy I was paired with was named Mark. early 40s, sarcastic, didn't talk much outside of work-related stuff. We set out early, using a modified swamp buggy to cover some of the dry ridges, before hiking in the last few miles with gear. The first day was routine, trudging through ankle-deep water, avoiding cottonmouths, swatting mosquitoes. But by the second afternoon, something felt off. Mark noticed it first. "You hear that?" he asked, stopping mid-stride. "Hear what?" He cocked his head. That's the point. He was right. No birds, no frogs, not even the buzz of insects. Just silence, thick and unnatural. We both glanced around, but didn't say anything more about it. Just kept walking, scribbling notes, checking the old coordinates. Eventually, we came across a rusted fence line running in a semicircle, almost hidden by vines. No gates, no path leading in, just fence, wrapping around something. Mark leaned against one of the posts. "You ever see a setup like this?" he asked. I hadn't. It didn't make sense. There were no animals out here, and no visible structures inside the enclosure. But someone had gone through the trouble of fencing it off decades ago. I marked the location on the map, but we didn't cross over. Something about it felt like a line we shouldn't step past. We camped about 50 yards from the fence, just off a patch of slightly higher ground. It was humid that night, the kind that makes the tent walls stick to your arms. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. It was a high-pitched whine, like a tuning fork, vibrating through the air just outside the tent. Not loud, but sharp, constant. I thought it was something electrical at first, maybe our radio gear. I sat up, unzipped the flap, and peeked out. Mark was already outside, standing barefoot in the mud, staring toward the fence line. I called his name. He didn't answer. I stepped out and walked up behind him, careful not to startle him. His eyes were wide, and his face was pale. He looked like he'd just been pulled out of ice water. "What is it?" he pointed. "There's something moving in there." I looked, but all I saw were trees and dark vines swaying. Then the pitch dropped. That same whine, it dipped lower, almost like it was reacting to us. And that's when I noticed something moving just behind the fence, low to the ground. At first, I thought it was a hog, but it moved to fluid, almost dragging itself in short, broken lurches. We backed away slowly. Neither of us spoke. In the morning, we didn't pack up right away. We walked the fence line, found no entrance, no break in the wire. Inside, there were impressions in the mud, long, narrow trenches, like something had been dragging limbs. I'm not talking about animal tracks. These were wide enough to be arms. We photographed it and left. I marked the location on our GPS, but when we got back to the main road, the data file was gone, just deleted. Our backup gear had the earlier maps, but nothing from that site. Later that night, Mark called me from his motel. He was panicked, said someone had knocked on his door, but no one was outside. He kept hearing the same high-pitched sound through the wall vent. I told him to get some sleep and that we'd report it in the morning, but he didn't show up. I waited at the diner near the highway until noon. I called his phone 4 times. Eventually, a sheriff's deputy stopped by and asked me some questions. Mark's room was empty, gear untouched. His truck was still in the lot. I told the deputy about the fence, about the sound. He didn't write much down. That was 6 years ago. They never found Mark. No sign of a struggle. No note. Nothing. I only went back once, with a different crew, to double-check the area for a separate job. The fence wasn't there anymore. The land had been cleared. But even now, If I close my eyes, I can hear that pitch again, rising, falling, like something listening back. The first few weeks after Mark vanished, I kept expecting someone to knock on my door. A ranger, maybe. It was like he never existed. I tried following up with the landowner who hired us, but he claimed not to know anything about a man named Mark. Said he'd only dealt with me directly, which wasn't true. I stopped pushing after that. Something about his tone felt practiced, to clean. I went back to my regular survey jobs up north for a while. I didn't talk about it with anyone, but I couldn't sleep right. That same tone kept coming back, like a pressure in my ears, subtle, always at the edge of silence. I started hearing it in the woods on normal jobs. I'd look up from my clipboard and swear something was moving just beyond the tree line, always in threes. 3 slow shifts in the brush, 3 faint clicks on the radio. A year after it happened, I got a voicemail from a private number. It was only a few seconds long, and all it played was that sound, that high-pitched whine, just as I remembered it. I sat there holding my phone, watching the seconds tick down, unable to move. That was the moment I knew I had to go back. Not for answers. I didn't believe I'd find any, but I couldn't live with it hanging over me. I needed to see if that fence was truly gone, or if it had just moved. I didn't bring anyone with me, just a satellite map printout, a compass, and an old tape recorder. I didn't trust digital gear anymore. I hiked in from a different angle, keeping my pace slow, cautious. It took a day and a half to reach the rough area, but nothing looked the same. The terrain was different. Some of the trees I remembered were gone, replaced by younger growth. The mud was soft but clean, no trenches, no signs of dragging. I camped on a narrow rise and waited. Just after midnight, I heard it again, faint, the exact pitch from before. Only this time, it was moving in slow pulses, like it was scanning. The ground around me didn't feel solid anymore. I could sense something pressing underneath it, like a heartbeat coming up through the soil. I didn't sleep. By morning, I was ready to leave. I packed my gear and turned toward the ridge when I saw something caught in a tree root, a piece of canvas, moldy, sun-bleached. I pulled it out and my stomach dropped. It was part of the tarp we used that last night. The corner had a small sewn-on tag, Mark's initials, written in faded black Sharpie. I hadn't seen it since the day he disappeared. I didn't take it with me. I shoved it back under the root, packed my gear, and left. That should have been the end of it. But 2 nights later, back at my apartment, I heard the sound again. Not from outside, from inside. My tape recorder clicked on by itself. I hadn't touched it since the trip. The reel spun, and that tone played back, rising, then fading, like something had been recorded while I slept. I sold my surveying gear the next week and moved inland, got an office job. I don't talk about what happened anymore. Most of the time, I pretend it was just stress, just a bad trip into a bad place. But I don't go near undeveloped land now. I don't trust silence, and I never, ever answer blocked calls. If you ask me what I think happened to Mark, I'll just say this. Some places out there were closed off for a reason. Not fenced to keep us out, but to keep something else in. Story 4. We were out there to film alligators. That was the plan, anyway. I was working with a freelance wildlife photographer named Alton. He had this idea to get close-up footage of gators nesting during the tail end of dry season, before the water levels came back up. said we could make a small documentary, pitch it to streaming sites, maybe sell the rights to a nature show. It sounded decent enough. I'd done side gigs with him before. Never anything deep in the glades, though. The problem started before we even reached the first site. One of the airboat fans started throwing sparks halfway through the approach. We drifted off a channel and had to tie off on a patch of flooded sawgrass. Alton cursed and tore into the fan housing, while I sat on the bow watching a water moccasin swim by like it had all the time in the world. No urgency, no sound, just that flat, creeping glide. We set up camp near a ridge of bald cypress trees, raised just enough out of the water to keep gear dry. There was an old half-rotted hunting blind nailed into one of the larger trunks, like someone gave up building it halfway through. We used that as a lookout. It gave us a decent view across a low basin to the south where we saw movement. At first we thought it was a gator wallowing in the mud, but the shape wasn't right. It hunched and shifted oddly, almost like it was dragging something behind it. Alton zoomed in with his lens and just muttered, "That's not a gator." We didn't get much footage that day. Whatever it was disappeared behind the reeds before we could film. That night, the air got heavier than I've ever felt. You know that feeling when a thunderstorm is about to break, the kind that makes your skin itch like it knows something you don't. That's how it felt, but nothing ever came. No rain, just heat, and a smell that rolled in like spoiled meat floating in a stagnant canal. Around 2 a.m., I woke up and noticed our camp lantern flickering, even though it was off. I thought I was dreaming at first. The light pulsed dimly, like someone was switching it on and off slowly. Alton was still asleep. I stepped out of the tent and saw the water around us rippling in even circles, no wind to explain it. Then I noticed that something was brushing the side of the boat. Not hard, just enough to rock it slightly. I stood there frozen, watching as the movement shifted toward the trees. Then the sound came, low, scraping, like wood being dragged across wood. It was coming from the hunting blind. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it up. There was someone or something crouched inside the blind. I only saw it for a second. Pale skin, bare arms, long and bent, its head tilted too far to one side. When the light hit it, it didn't flinch. It just lowered itself slowly until I couldn't see it anymore. I woke Alton up. He was groggy, irritated, until I told him what I saw. He didn't say anything, just got dressed, grabbed his camera, and climbed up the ladder with shaking hands. I begged him not to, but he went up anyway. I stood at the base, listening, flashlight trained on the slats above. He stayed quiet for about a minute. Then he whispered, "There's something here, but it's not human." I climbed halfway up, stopping at the third rung when I saw the floor of the blind. It was covered in hair, long black strands, some matted with what looked like dried blood. Alton was pointing the lens into the far corner, but his hands were trembling too much to hold focus. That's when the camera light flickered. Not the battery dying, just flickering, like it was being interfered with. Then we heard a splash in the water below us. Not one, several, heavy, deliberate. I looked down. Shapes were moving through the dark water, circling the boat. We didn't sleep again that night. By morning, all of our gear had been moved, not stolen, just relocated. The cooler was half submerged, 50 feet from camp. The camera tripod was sitting in the middle of the clearing we hadn't walked into. Our water bottles were all emptied and laid in a perfect line across the bank. Alton didn't want to admit it, but he was scared. Real fear, the kind that doesn't fade with daylight. We packed up as fast as we could and tried to get the airboat started. The engine clicked once, then nothing. I climbed in, opened the housing, and found it gutted. Wires stripped, like someone had gone in with pliers and pulled everything out during the night. That's when Alton spotted the footprints. Human looking but wrong. Toes too long. Heels sunk deeper than they should have, like the weight was centered at the back of the foot. There were at least 4 distinct trails circling the boat, overlapping in spirals. Then we heard a voice, clear, low, just one word, wait. It came from the tree line behind us. We turned, but nothing was there. Only the water moved. Alton dropped his camera. The lens cracked against the boat rail, and he didn't even flinch. We both stared at the tree line, waiting for someone to step out, but nothing moved. The water was still. No wind, no birds, no bugs. Just that voice echoing in our heads. Not loud, not threatening, but it didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like a command. We backed toward the boat. I kept scanning the trees, flashlight trembling in my hand. Alton crouched to pick up the pieces of his gear, but I told him to leave it. We had to move. If we couldn't get the engine working, we'd have to pole the boat out by hand. Anything to put distance between us and that blind. We drifted north, using an oar and a makeshift pole we pulled from a snapped limb. The channel was narrow and twisted, with roots reaching up like fingers from both sides. Every so often, we'd hear something behind us, a soft splash, a branch snapping, but nothing ever came into view that was somehow worse. Around mid-afternoon, we came across a half-flooded canoe wedged between 2 cypress stumps. It looked ancient, paint long gone, wood waterlogged and splintering. There was a plastic milk crate inside, filled with bones. Animal, probably, small, delicate, arranged carefully, like they'd been placed there on purpose. Alton didn't want to look closer. We're not supposed to be out here, he kept saying. This place, it's for something else. We pressed on until dusk, finally grounding the boat against a small mud bank. We hadn't eaten since the morning, and our water was almost gone. Alton looked bad, pale, unfocused. He kept glancing behind him like he was expecting someone to grab his shoulder. We stayed near the boat that night, but we didn't set up camp. We sat with our backs to the hull, one of us awake while the other tried to rest. Just before midnight, Alton shook me awake. They're watching us, he whispered. I looked up, and across the water, on the far side of the channel, there were shapes, hard to make out through the trees, but they were there, tall, motionless. 5, maybe 6 of them, just standing there, not moving, not even shifting weight. We didn't shine a light, didn't call out. We just waited, hearts pounding, until they slowly stepped back into the brush, one by one, disappearing without a sound. Alton wanted to leave right then, but it was too dark. The roots were too thick, the channels too narrow. We had to wait for light, so we sat there all night, barely blinking. When morning finally came, they were gone. No tracks, no sound, no sign of anything. We kept moving until we hit an old, rusted-out trapper's platform, just a raised wooden platform half swallowed by the swamp. From there, we managed to get a signal and called in a ranger. It took them 6 hours to reach us. When they showed up, we didn't tell them what really happened, just said our boat died and we got turned around. I never saw Alton again after that week. He dropped off every project we'd worked on, didn't answer texts. Last I heard, he moved to the Midwest and stopped taking photo gigs altogether. Sometimes, I still go over the audio from that trip. One of the backup recorders caught something during the night. We stayed near the blind, mostly static and wind. But at one point, there's a voice, very faint, drawn out, almost like a whisper, stretched over several seconds. It says the same word we heard out there. Wait, only this time, there's something else underneath it. A second voice, smaller, weaker, like someone was repeating the word from far away, trying to answer it. I don't play that recording anymore. Story 5. People always talk about getting lost in the Everglades like it's just bad luck. Take a wrong turn, forget your compass, maybe run low on supplies. They never mention the feeling that creeps in long before you realize you're off course. Like the swamp already knows you're not getting out. I was out there with my uncle, a stubborn old guy who'd been hunting that area since the 80s. He didn't believe in GPS, said maps were all you needed, and that the swamp hadn't changed in 50 years, no matter what people said. We were looking for hog sign, just a short trek off a levee trail he liked. The plan was to stay 2 nights, catch the early movement near the hammocks, and be back before the weekend crowd came in. First day went fine. We saw prints, found fresh rooting, and even spotted a group of hogs at dusk. Set up camp on dry ground near a cluster of cabbage palms. He cooked beans on a little steel pan and told me stories I'd already heard. The usual run-ins with gators, boats getting stuck. One time he claimed a cougar followed him for half a mile without ever showing its face. But it was the second night that changed things. We were lying in our tents when we heard something moving outside the ring of trees. Not a hog, not a deer. It walked too slow, too upright. My uncle froze. I could hear him holding his breath in the tent next to mine. The steps circled us once, maybe twice, then faded off into the brush. Neither of us said anything until morning. When we stepped out, we found our fire pit had been torn apart, not scattered, disassembled. Stones moved, wood stacked neatly beside it. No animal had done that. And our trail markers, the little reflective tacks we nailed to trees, were gone. Every single one. We're not alone out here, my uncle muttered. We packed up and decided to head back that morning. The path should have been a straight line north, less than 2 miles. But after 3 hours, nothing looked familiar. We circled back twice, found a familiar-looking patch of ferns, only to realize it was identical to another one we'd passed before. Around noon, we found the shirt. It was tied to a branch about 8 feet up. Faded flannel, sleeves missing, stiff from rain and time. My uncle reached up and pulled it down. There was a name tag on it, stitched in, not written. I didn't recognize the name, but I could tell from the way my uncle stared at it that he did. He didn't say anything, just dropped it and kept walking. By late afternoon, we were both sweating through our clothes and getting dehydrated. The compass needle started acting funny, twitching every time we crossed under certain trees. My uncle tapped it and gave up trying to read it after a while. Magnetic fields, screwy out here, he said, but his voice sounded thin, like he didn't believe it. We stopped to rest near a thicket of brush. I took a sip from the last of my water bottle. That's when I saw someone standing in the distance, not walking, not calling for help, just standing. A man, tall, wearing something dark. I blinked, and he was gone. I didn't say anything, thought maybe it was heat stroke. But 5 minutes later, my uncle said, "You saw him too, didn't you?" We kept moving. By the time the sun dipped low, the sounds of the swamp had faded to almost nothing. No frogs, no buzz of insects. Even the wind felt muffled, like it couldn't quite make it through the trees. Then we heard it, a dragging sound, long, slow, like something being pulled through wet leaves. It was close, but never visible. We started moving faster, forcing our way through brush, ignoring direction, just trying to put distance between us and whatever that was. The last thing we saw before it got completely dark was a wooden sign nailed to a tree, old, weathered. The lettering was barely legible, carved by hand. It said, "Don't follow." That's when we realized we'd been walking in a circle. I remember the way my uncle just stood there, staring at the sign like he was seeing it for the first time, even though it must have been there for years. The carving was deep and crooked, like whoever wrote it had been in a rush or barely able to hold the blade. The bark around it was darker, too, like the tree had tried to grow over the words, but failed. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We kept moving, not because we knew where to go, but because stopping felt worse. The dragging sound had stopped, but the silence pressed down harder with each step. It wasn't just that the swamp was quiet. It was that we felt watched, studied, like the trees themselves were leaning in to listen. Eventually, we found a dry ridge and collapsed there without building a fire. Neither of us was willing to give away our position. It wasn't loud, just under the leaves, just enough to question if it was real. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, everything was bathed in faint orange, early morning light. My uncle wasn't beside me. His backpack was gone, his rifle gone. Only his sleeping mat was left, pressed flat into the dirt. I called his name once, then again, louder, nothing. I started looking for tracks. There weren't any, just damp earth and broken brush. I walked about 50 yards, heart pounding, before I found his knife stuck into a tree trunk. It was his. No doubt about it. The handle was chipped near the base. It had always been like that. Below it, carved into the bark, was one word: back. That was the first time I felt real fear. Not panic, fear, deep in the chest. The kind you don't shake off. I turned around, made my way back to the ridge, and grabbed my pack. I still don't know why I didn't run. Maybe I knew there was no direction that mattered anymore. That day was a blur of wandering. I kept the knife with me, left little markings on trees as I went, not expecting them to help, but needing to do something. Once, I stopped to drink rainwater from a hollowed log. When I looked up, I saw a figure in the trees again, same man as before, still watching. I turned around fast, nothing there. When I looked back, he was gone. That night, I found my uncle's voice recorder. He always carried it when he scouted alone. It was sitting on a stone, too perfectly placed. I hit play with shaking hands, static, waiting for us to leave or join. I don't think it matters which. Another pause. If you find this, turn around. Don't stay. Don't sleep. Click. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sit. I stood with my back against a tree until the sky began to change color again. At sunrise, I started walking. I didn't know which direction anymore. I just picked a line and didn't stop. Around mid-morning, I stumbled into a camp. Not mine, not his. I didn't answer. Couldn't, really. He let me sit, fed me a cracker and a can of warm beans. Didn't say much else. A few hours later, a water patrol passed by. I flagged them down, told them I'd gotten separated. Didn't mention anything else. They searched for my uncle for 4 days, found no trace, not the mat, not the knife, not even the sign. They asked me if I was sure about the location. I was. I never went back. I don't hike. I don't hunt. I won't even walk into a tree line if I can help it. I think he knew what he was doing, walking off like that. He left me a warning, left me time. Maybe he thought one of us should get out, or maybe he saw something I didn't. Either way, I know now what he meant when he told me years ago. Then it offers you something. Then it waits to see if you'll follow. He followed. Story 6. We were 5 days into clearing a collapsed canal route when things started to go wrong. I was out there with a government-contracted crew, just 6 of us total, cutting back brush and digging along a narrow waterway that hadn't been used in decades. Some of these older routes twist out where maps stop trying to explain anything. You're just following stagnant water, dodging gators, and praying the boat doesn't bottom out on something man-made and rusting. Our base camp was nothing more than a canvas shelter set up on a slightly raised island, surrounded by sawgrass and buzzing with insects so thick you had to chew the air. We worked in 12-hour shifts. Eat, dig, clear, repeat. At first, it was the usual. Heat, dehydration, arguments over nothing. By day 3, people stopped sleeping right. By day 4, 2 of the guys had fevers and couldn't keep anything down. That night, the wind changed. It's hard to explain unless you've lived down here, but the air in the Everglades carries things, smells, sounds, even voices. Sometimes you hear fishermen a mile away, laughing like they're in your ear. Other times, it carries the rot of something dead long before you ever see it. This time, it was smoke, not fire smoke. Something sharper, sour, like chemicals or burning trash. No one said anything at first. We were exhausted. But then Jerry, the oldest of us, stood up from his cot and said, "That's not right. That ain't brush fire." He just walked out into the dark with his flashlight. Didn't even grab a radio. The rest of us waited for maybe 10 minutes. Someone cracked a joke to cut the tension, but no one laughed. I grabbed a second flashlight and followed his trail, calling his name a couple times, not too loud. There was no wind under the trees, no air at all. The deeper I walked, the more muffled everything got. I could still see his boot prints in the mud. Then they stopped, just stopped. No sign of him turning around, no dragging, no indication of where he went. I stood there for a long minute, light bouncing off trunks and palmetto. I thought I saw a shape just past the edge of the beam, a figure maybe, but it didn't move, and I wasn't brave enough to get closer. I backed out, careful not to lose my way. When I got back to camp, the air was thick with that same chemical burn. The canvas walls stank. Everyone was outside, coughing or dry heaving. One guy, Victor, was stuffing his gear into a duffel. Said he didn't care about payment. He was leaving at first light. We didn't stop him. We waited until morning, hoping Jerry would come back. He didn't. Victor left at dawn, took the small motorboat, and never looked back. We didn't hear from him again. We reported Jerry missing. A helicopter came through the next afternoon and did a few loops. They didn't find anything. No movement, no tracks. They told us to sit tight, that more people would be coming, but they didn't arrive the next day or the one after. The nights started stretching out. We couldn't sleep anymore. The heat never lifted, even at midnight. We began to hear things in the water, splashing that didn't follow patterns. Sometimes voices like whispers, just out of reach. Once, I swore I heard Jerry's laugh, but it wasn't right. It echoed in a way that had no direction. That fifth night, I woke up to someone standing outside my tent, just standing, silent. The silhouette stayed there a few seconds, then just walked off into the trees. Next morning, all our tools were gone. No machetes, no hatchets, not even the fuel cans. We searched everywhere, thinking it was a prank or a theft. But there were no tracks, no signs of a struggle or animals, just a strange, oily residue left where the tools had been laid the night before. We didn't pack up. We didn't run. I think we were past that, like the swamp had wrung all the decision-making out of us. And that night, it did. We heard something come out of the water. Not a splash, a rising, like something pulling itself up onto the island. I couldn't see it. None of us could. But we all heard it, and none of us said a word. We just waited, straining our ears, hearts beating so loud we probably couldn't have heard anything else. Then I heard a voice, maybe 20 feet away. It was Jerry. "I found it," he said, clear as day. "I found the reason this place was closed off." That was all he said. I didn't move, but in the morning, there were only 3 of us left. The moment I heard Jerry's voice, cold dread slammed into me like a punch. I wanted to shout back, call him by name, but my throat had seized up. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the flashlight. The others were frozen too. No one moved, no one breathed loud enough to break the silence. "Jerry, where are you?" I finally managed to whisper, stepping toward the edge of the clearing, my eyes straining to penetrate the thick darkness. No answer, just the soft rustling of sawgrass and the distant croak of frogs. I crept closer to where the voice had come from, careful not to snap a twig or disturb the swamp's fragile surface. The ground was soft and uneven, soaked with last week's rains, making each step a tentative negotiation with the mud. Then I saw it, prints, not human, deep, wide, and uneven, leading away from the camp into the waterlogged thicket. My heart raced. I called the others, but only 2 came, Mike and Luis. We followed the tracks, feeling like we were sinking into some trap. The swamp seemed to close in around us, the trees pressing like walls, the air thick and sour. We moved slowly, the sound of dripping water and distant wildlife filling the night. The deeper we got, the heavier the silence became, like the swamp was holding its breath. Then came the smell, the same sharp chemical sting we'd noticed days before, but stronger, almost unbearable. I gagged. Luis covered his mouth, eyes wide. Mike whispered, "This isn't natural." We reached a small clearing, a patch of open water ringed by dead trees. Floating on the surface was a rusted metal box, half submerged and covered in algae. It looked old, like something forgotten for decades. Mike knelt and tried to lift it, but it was stuck fast. Luis found a stick and poked at the edges. The box shifted, revealing a jagged hole corroded through one side. From inside came a faint, low hum, almost mechanical. None of us had any idea what we were looking at. Then, a sudden crack echoed through the clearing. The water rippled violently, like something enormous was moving beneath the surface. Luis stepped back, eyes locked on the water. A figure rose from the swamp. Not Jerry, something else. Tall, thin, with slick, dark skin that glistened under the moonlight. It didn't have a face, just a smooth surface where features should have been. It hovered, just above the water, barely making a splash, its long arms hanging like dead branches. We froze. It opened its mouth, or where its mouth should have been, and let out a sound that was half a groan, half a mechanical whir. Mike broke the silence with a shout and bolted back toward camp. Luis and I followed, heart pounding, feet slapping against mud and roots. By the time we got back, the camp was a disaster. Our tents were shredded. Our supplies were missing. Tracks led in all directions. We knew we couldn't stay. We grabbed what little we could carry and got on the boat. I fumbled for the radio and called for help. Static answered. The swamp was swallowing everything. Help came the next day, but the search was brief. The authorities wouldn't come near that area after what we told them. They called it an environmental hazard, said the site was contaminated. Our story didn't fit their reports. Jerry was never found. Neither was Victor or the others who left early. I left with a scar no one sees. I won't ever forget the silence before that thing rose from the water, or the way the swamp swallowed our voices and our hope. I don't know what it was. Maybe a mutated experiment, or something nature fought back against. All I know is that swamp hides things better than anyone realizes, and some of those things don't want to be found. I stopped working on projects like that. The swamp still calls, but I've learned to listen without answering.